Hi everyone. We're just about to get started here. It's almost 10:05 on the Pacific time zone anyway. A little bit of heads up, so we'll go for about 20, 25 minutes, cover the bulk of the presentation. Then a few minutes after, tell you a little bit about our company, and then there'll be some time for questions after that. So if you have any questions in the meantime, you can post them into the chat so I can collect them and then see them and tackle them at the end. Okay. Also, one final thing, the whole thing is being recorded. So after the presentation, I'll send you a link to the video and the slides and any relevant links that come up throughout the presentation. Great. So today we are talking about how to collect data once and send it everywhere. So this is commonly through tools like segment.com, mParticle, relatively newcomers to analytics space, probably become quite popular over the last, I would say, few years, versus maybe Mixpanel or Google Analytics, which have been around for a long time now. So we'll talk all about these tools, why you want to use them, why they're so popular, and the entire concept behind them. So today we'll be looking at the following four things. What is the role of tools like segment.com and mParticle, and even maybe custom solutions you might build internally to replicate what they do. How to think in terms of abstraction, something that I talk a lot about with clients and companies and anyone that really asks any question around analytics. The most common problem technology companies run into when they're building their stacks, especially these days, especially when you have so many choices around what to add to your marketing stack in terms of tools, and how to eventually outgrow your existing analytics tools, why it will happen, and how to be ready for it. As I mentioned before, I will answer your questions at the end of the webinar. So post them in the chat in the meantime. A little bit about me. So my name is Ruben, and I'm the founder of Practical Analytics. Maybe you've seen me in some other videos or some other emails. My background sort of officially is as a front-end developer, but I really spent the last few years working in marketing and specifically working in data-driven marketing and analytics. At Practical, we work exclusively with software companies. They usually have a web or mobile app, and then we help them set up the right tools on the marketing and product side. So it's usually about understanding the user life cycle from the moment they see a marketing campaign to when they sign up for the products to when they actually use the product and they become a paying customer. It's all about collecting all the right data points along that journey. Some additional facts about me. The picture on the left is actually my sister's wedding back in August. It's actually the first wedding I've ever been to. It was actually quite fun. It was a multi-day party event. And on the right, it's something I do outside of work, a little bit of salsa dancing and so on. And that's actually also my sister. She's been dancing for a long, long time. So getting a chance to learn a little bit with her has been great. So if we can fast forward a little bit of how we're here and how we got to the space in this analytics space. 5 years ago, I was running a startup, a video platform for really specific niche content, like yoga videos, or maybe a yoga instructor wants to sell yoga videos. So we did that for a couple of years. We had some customers. We couldn't really scale it as well. But there were a lot of issues that we ran into in terms of knowing exactly what to do next, what the users were doing. Back then, we were using very simple stack of Google Analytics, really didn't have anything like Mixpanel or anything like that. So today, from those things, and I came up and said, hey, this analytics space is a challenge. It's something that we struggle quite a bit as an early stage startup. What's the right time and space for tackling analytics tools? And today we have worked with tons of different companies. A lot of them are venture-backed, seed round or Series A, software, mobile apps, and we just help them set up those right tools. We also been fortunate enough to get featured in some online publications like Crazy Egg, Conversion Excel, and so on. So let's start with a couple big ideas to guide the entire presentation. So one is the idea that specific tools matter less than the right strategy. And this is sometimes hard to get through. I find when we talk to companies, they usually have a preference for what tools they want to work with. They want to work with Mixpanel. They want to work with Amplitude. And, a lot of times they've done the research, so they know it's a good fit. And it's not so much about not using them, it's about understanding that tools change. They will change as a company grows. So being less married to the tools and understanding really how the data gets stored, how you're going to use it, and planning for eventually outgrowing tools, which is all really what I would consider strategy. Of course, finding analytics data can be a competitive advantage in terms of understanding exactly what is going on with your product. It's common to see very fast-growing companies really leverage data extensively in terms of defining what product features to build, really figuring out what marketing campaigns are working and what marketing campaigns are not working. So it can clearly be something that can be very powerful, yet hard to make work, depending on what kind of experience you have inside your company. So actually, I'm actually going to skip this question here and just jump right into it. Okay, so the bulk of what we're here today, all about Segment. So if you've seen Segment or if you've seen mParticle, and if you don't, here's a quick overview of the tools. So both tools really help you capture data from, let's say, the web, or from a web app, from a mobile app, maybe pull data from sources like Stripe or Facebook ads and so on, and then they help you send the data to a bunch of different places. So those places might be tools like Google Analytics, like Mixpanel, maybe like Intercom, Customer I/O. You can also send data to Facebook. You can also send data to a warehouse. So you can imagine it almost like a traffic cop. Sort of taking data in and taking data out. So data goes in, data goes out. So it's a pipeline. So both tools do something very similar. So the question is, why should you use them, right? Why send the data through them instead of just sending it directly to Google Analytics or sending it directly to Mixpanel? The short answer is that it's really all about saving you development time and giving you ownership of your data. So to understand that, let's look at how a marketing stack or an analytics stack are usually built. So let's say you're an early stage company, you're growing, let's say you're before product market fit. At that stage, you likely can have a very, very simple stack. Maybe not even this. So day one, you'll start with something like Google Analytics, which is sort of the easiest thing to implement. You set it up, you get it online, you start seeing some traffic numbers, kind of where you're coming from. Maybe a tool like Mixpanel. In all the slots, don't think of the tools as this is exactly what you have to do, as a tool like this one. So it might be Google Analytics, so it might be something like Heap or Conversion or Hotjar or Full Story, or maybe Mixpanel or Amplitude or Heap again. The point is that you start with a relatively simple stack, right? Then let's say day 180, so 6 months later, you're gonna add a few more things. Now you wanna do some messaging to your users. You're gonna add Intercom. Now you wanna start acquiring traffic. So you're gonna start running some Facebook ads, maybe some Twitter ads, some Google ads. And this is of course on top of what we did in day one. So now we have 3 or 4 sources of data that are all important to us. We're using it in our KPIs and our reports. But we can start to see that now things are a little broken, right? And then let's say we go another 6 months after. Now we might add like a BI tool like Tableau, Domo, Clipfolio, maybe on the smaller side. And the challenge that starts to arise here is that the data is siloed and broken out and broken apart across different tools. So now to create a report, it's a bit of a struggle. Right now you have to go and say pull a few numbers from Google Analytics, pull a few numbers from Mixpanel, pull a few numbers from Intercom, of course pull your acquisition numbers or advertising numbers from Facebook, and bring it into some kind of single report. Now some tools, specifically on the BI side, will help you connect this data by integrating with the tools directly, but it depends on what they support. And this is where a tool like Segment might come in. In terms of unifying a lot of this data, flowing all this data through a single pipeline, so you're able to access it eventually from a single point, and really help you avoid some of these issues. Another thing that might come up here is, by the time you get to day, let's say 365, a year in, you maybe outgrew Google Analytics, right? Maybe you're at a point where you're past 1 million page views a month. So now you're getting a lot of sampling in Google Analytics. You don't want to, you're not ready to upgrade to the paid version of Google Analytics, which is 150K, but there's another tool you want to use. So now you're going to go back and swap out your day one selection for a much better one, a much better fit to where you are. But then you have to start again. You have to re-implement it. You won't have any historical data and so on. So basically, choosing the right tools, swapping those tools out, they can all become a bit of a pain in how stacks are built today. There's a lot of costs and even lock-in mechanisms built in to our tools to manage. And this is where we can start to think about the power of abstraction, so to speak. So, abstraction is a little bit more fancy term, but what we're really trying to say is, instead of relying and assuming that we're going to be using a very specific tool, let's go broad, let's go general, and then that will give us flexibility to add or remove tools, especially because a lot of tools are very similar, right? These days, when you look at tools like Mixpanel or Amplitude, they're both competitors. They both focus on the product space for web and mobile apps. There's a lot of overlap in between them. And yes, each software, each tool has some pros and cons versus the other one, but they're very similar. And more importantly, the implementation of both tools is very similar. So here we can see an example on the left-hand side. This is how we send events to Mixpanel and Intercom. So Intercom is a messaging tool. They also take events. And of course, Mixpanel is an event-driven product tool. So if you look at the code, and this is all in JavaScript, you don't have to be a developer to understand it. But if you look at it, it's very, very similar. The data we're sending, we send an event name, and then we're sending 3 properties here. And then for Intercom, we do the same thing. So the code is almost identical in its structure, and yet it's not. So if we were to implement both of these tools at the same time, what we would end up is we would have to write the code twice. So we would have to say, okay, now we're going to have to write the code for Mixpanel. Oh, and then we want the same thing in Intercom. We have to write the same code again. Oh, and we want to send this code to Google Analytics. Well, we have to write the code a third time. And we want to send this data as an event, let's say as a conversion event to Facebook. Now we have to write the event a fourth time. As this is just sort of one event, one action. Imagine now you're doing 10, 20, 30 actions. It starts to really add up, and going back and managing, or eventually swapping out tools and so on. So that's where a lot of development time can be spent, simply managing sort of your code repository. But let's say we instead come from a perspective of abstraction, right? Not really tool specific. It's more about having some kind of pipeline to send it through. So on the right, we have the code for segment.com. So we do a lot of work with segment.com, and we love the tool. The same will apply for something like mParticle, and even we have clients who are building their own equivalent to segment.com. So on the right, we have a segment.com event tracking. As you can see, it's also very similar to the Mixpanel one. We have the event name, we have the 3 properties, but it's not specific to Mixpanel, right? And the benefit here is that we'll be able to send this event to segment, let's say, and a segment will convert it in the backend. They'll convert it to Mixpanel, or they'll convert it to Google Analytics, or they'll convert it to Facebook and so on. So they'll do a lot of the heavy lifting and the heavy conversion for us. We just have to send it to them once. And from there, we'll be able to really play with it and convert it to, I think, about 200 plus tools, right? So that's quite handy, right? So we don't have to worry about that specific code. So a few other benefits, I mentioned before the idea of swapping out tools when they were relevant. So we know that, let's say once we get on day 365 here, we might want to swap out, let's say, Mixpanel for Amplitude, and maybe we'll swap out Intercom for Customer I/O. We'll still keep in Google Analytics and Facebook. This is this swapping out can become quite easy when you have some kind of abstraction layer, right? Because your code wasn't written specifically for Mixpanel. It wasn't written specifically for Intercom. It was very broad, it was very general. So now you can just say, hey, now I don't want the tool, now I'm just going to do another tool, right? Some tools, Segment.com and mParticle are sort of the off-the-shelf solutions. Some of them even offer the ability to do a replay of historical data. So let's say you implement Customer I/O, a messaging tool on day 365. You have about a year worth of data, right? That's sort of historical data. Now you can sort of replay that data into Customer I/O. So you start. So from the first day of the implementation, you can start with some historical data, right? A few other benefits, you can easily deploy marketing pixels through this. Things like Twitter pixels, Facebook pixels. You can, of course, transform the data, control where it goes. So you might say, hey, this event that we're sending to Segment, we only want to send it to Google Analytics, and we don't want to send it to Mixpanel, or we don't want to send it to Facebook, right? So you have a bit of control, ownership of the data. You can, of course, test your data for accuracy. You can see your data flow through, right? And you can see the structure of the data as it flows through. There's a bit of enrichment, which I'll talk in the next one. This is an interesting feature. And something that's more relevant now, of course, was the GDPR, which is coming into effect in about a month from now. For those not familiar, GDPR, the European Union's rules for data collection, data privacy. And there's of course different aspects to go with that, but one of the main aspects for companies to collect data is that if a user puts a request for the data to be deleted, it has to be deleted across the board, right? It has to be deleted across all the potential tools where that user might be tracked. And it has to be, the user has to stop being tracked. So you can imagine this can become a bit of a hassle, a bit of an administrative hassle, where now, let's say John Smith asks his data to be deleted, and now we have to go through Google Analytics, we have to go through Mixpanel, through Amplitude, through Facebook. We have to go through, a bunch of tools to find all the data related to John Smith and delete it, right? So a lot of these tools like Segment and mParticle are starting to build APIs to be able to do this through code, basically. To be able to do that across the board, send a request based on, let's say, a user ID. So now we take John Smith, user ID, and now we can see all the data that flow through, let's say through Segment on that user ID, and then send deletion requests. And send those deletion requests downstream to Mixpanel and Google Analytics and so on. But the process, it's sort of managed at the top. So it becomes pretty handy. Now, before I go on to the next one, I do want to show a bit of a demo of Segment so we can actually get that. So let me move here. Let me go to the homepage too, because I find they have a really handy graph here to clarify if it's still not as clear. So, we have done a lot of work with Segment. It's something that really for early stage companies, maybe even mid stage companies, we really, really recommend. It makes a lot of things a lot easier in the beginning, and it makes a lot of choices much easier. Of course, mParticle is similar to it, and as I mentioned, some companies are building their own equivalent to Segment. So let's see. So these have a great chart right here. So the basic idea that we're talking about here is that we need to capture data from a lot of different points, mobile apps, web, a server, maybe some cloud apps. And then we need to flow the data to a bunch of different tools. We talk a lot about analytics tools, but of course, a lot of tools out there now are being used to track users, help desk, email tools like Intercom, MailChimp, attribution tools, warehouses, which I'll also talk in a specific slide, the ability of sending data to a database. So this is the pipeline that we can start to build, right? So this is where we can start doing the abstraction in the center. Instead of worrying and writing code specifically for one of the 50 potential tools in this space, let's just send it here, and then let's let Segment or mParticle do the conversion for us, right? So we'll send it to them in the structure they want, and they'll convert it for us into the right structure for Mixpanel or for MailChimp and so on. If you build a custom solution, you basically replicate the same thing, right? You're building a central place or a central structure that you're going to capture data from, and then you're going to do the conversion on your end on the code. I've seen clients and companies manage this successfully. The ability to say they write an abstracted way of capturing events, and then they'll say, okay, we want to. Here's a bit of logic to convert this into the right structure for Mixpanel, or here's the right logic to convert that into the right structure for Google Analytics. So you don't get all the features that you might get from some of that segment, but you can get some of them. Okay. So here's a bit of demo of segment. So in the same, we have two major concepts. Of course, we have sources and we have destinations. So sources is where's the data coming from, and destinations is where we send the data to. So in this example, we have a source of website. So we're capturing data through a JavaScript library. This is very common. So if you have a web app, this is what you'd be using. You can also have sources. Let's look at this. You can also have sources around mobile apps, right? Here's some of the AMAP mobile. We can, of course, have server libraries. So if you want to send events from a server, whether it's Ruby, Node.js, PHP. A common example here might be, let's say you want to track transaction data. So maybe a user subscribes to a plan, or maybe the plan renews, or maybe they buy something, maybe like an e-commerce store. You're likely going to send this from the server, from a backend to make it more reliable. This is what you'd be using. And of course, we have some built-in apps where we can pull data from. So maybe you want to pull data from MailChimp, or we want to pull data from Facebook, Facebook ads or Google ads, and so on. So let's go back. So we have our JavaScript source here. And we can see that this is it's enable, and we're flowing data to 6 destinations here, right? So we're sending data to Facebook, specifically the Facebook pixel. We're sending data to Full Story, to Google Analytics, to Hotjar, to Klaviyo, which is an email marketing tool, and Postgres, which is a warehouse, which I'll also talk in a bit. So a few cool things. Here's a debugger. The debugger shows us all the data as it flows through a segment. So we can take any event. For example, here's an event called scroll depth engagement, which fires as the user scroll down the page. Say they hit 25%, 50% of the page, and so on. So we can see, this is the event that we sent. Right, here's the event name, and here's the 3 properties we're sending. Right. And if you look at the raw, there's a few other things that get collected here, like the user agent, the path, where they came from, where this data is going, and so on. So we can use this to debug data, right? We can take an event, or we can even be testing our app and saying, are we actually seeing the events come through? Are we seeing them with the right properties and the right values? There's also an ability to control the schema itself. So you can, this becomes a way for you to say, hey, these are all the events I'm tracking. Do I want to send it, right? Do I want to filter it, only send it to a few specific tools? Maybe I want to stop sending it, or maybe I want to stop collecting it, right? So we see a few categories there. And then lastly, some settings here on the source itself. Now, what's interesting too is now we can see, for example, a destination. So let's go look at Google Analytics as a destination. Let's go here. So here's all the destinations that we have for our JavaScript source. If we were to look at all the potential destinations here, there really is about 200 plus tools here. Category on the analytics side, we have the common tools we're quite used to. We'll have email tools, advertising tools. A common example here, if you want about Facebook, you can send custom events to Facebook and use them as conversions. So you can take any event that you might be sending to a segment and send it to Facebook. Send it to some raw data, some A/B testing tools, and so on and so on and so on. So there's really quite a bit. Now let's go back here. So let's look at Google Analytics, which is enable. Let's go look at the settings. So what we have here is we provide our ID, and then we have some specific settings relevant to each destination. And this is what's kind of handy. A lot of times when you do custom implementations, for say Google Analytics, there's a lot of specific things you want to add. Maybe you want to add e-commerce tracking. Maybe you want to anonymize the IP. You want to do all these things that are not available out of the box. Segment gives you a lot of optional different settings here that you can enable or disable. Things like custom dimensions and metrics are here. Do you want to do the cross-domain name automatically? You want to enable remarketing, and so on and so on. So it's handy because then you're still able to access a lot of those advanced settings, even though you're implementing and sending data through Segment, right? And if we go back and open, let's say, there's no Mixpanel here, maybe Klaviyo, we're going to see some optional settings that are then relevant for this destination itself. And that's really it. Segment is a place where you're going to store data. Of course, there's no analysis to be done here. All that's going to happen somewhere else. But it becomes quite handy. It can become your source of control for data. And as I mentioned, mParticle, a competitor, will do very similar things, even a very similar interface. And you can, of course, build your own. So you don't have to use segment.com specifically. Okay, let's go back here. 1%. Okay. So one thing that's also becoming very interesting, once you have a source of control for your data where it's flowing through a central place, now you can do a lot of cool things. One of them is the idea of audiences. I believe mParticle calls them audiences, Segment calls them personas, and enrichment comes up quite a bit too. But the basic idea here is you want to build a group of users somehow. You'll say, hey, we want to look at users who fired an event called installs over the last 30 days, who are located in New York, and whose LTV is $20 or more. So we're saying a very specific criteria. We build that audience through all the data that's available in Segment, and then we can send it to tools sort of downstream. So we can send it to Facebook as an audience, Salesforce, and so on. So on the left image, it's actually the mParticle example of how they do it, and on the right is how Segment.com does it. And you can see it's really the same idea, a very specific criteria that you can then send down to different tools. So this becomes a very interesting way of creating almost like this idea of almost like global cohorts that you'll then be able to access in all your different tools like MailChimp and so on. It's something that I think companies want to do, where they say, hey, we got the segment that we want to look at. How do we know if a user belongs to that segment across all of our marketing tools? So tools like this will let you do that, which is pretty cool. It's still very early. It's I know Segment just released a beta of this product. I think mParticle has been doing it for a few months, but it'll become quite powerful, especially as you have more data. Finally, another thing to consider is the idea of a warehouse. So warehouse is just something. It's a database of data. When you're just starting out, you'll be using Google Analytics and Mixpanel and so on to analyze your data. Eventually, you're going to get to this idea of a warehouse, of a database. Tools like Segment and mParticle help you build it. So the point of a warehouse is that it's a place where you're storing all your data. So Segment and mParticle is a place where all your data flows through, but of course you have to store it somewhere. So you can store it inside Google Analytics, you can store it inside Mixpanel. You can also start storing it in a database, in a single database. The reason why you would ever want to do this is eventually you'll eventually want to create very complex reports. So you'll eventually want to be able to see, okay, we want to look at the entire user journey from marketing campaign, from a Facebook ad, all the way to a customer support ticket in Zendesk. So that involves 4, 5, 6 different tools. Instead of trying to pull data from 4 or 6 different tools, we can just simply store it all in the database and then query it and then create our reports from there. So to do that, we'll set up warehouses. So you'll notice as your company gets bigger and bigger, a warehouse becomes really the easiest way to do this, right? Instead of dealing with very specific APIs and does Zendesk allow you to export data? Do we get the data we want? We don't have to worry about any of that. We can just say we're actually just going to store all the data in a warehouse in a more universal format and then work with it. So if this sounds like it's not really relevant to you right now, don't worry. For most early stage companies, it's not. It really doesn't become relevant until you're able to hire a data analyst who can actually work with the data. So if you don't have that, this is not. But you can start building it. So you can set it up, and the setup is relatively straightforward, and you can start to collect that data. So final one, I love abstraction. I love segment.com. I love mParticle. I really recommend that as an option for companies. But there is downsides. So there is things to consider before taking it head on. So one is the biggest downside with this kind of tools is the cost. So the cost can really add up. So a lot of these tools will segment charges you based on users, on how many users you're tracking, anonymous and your actual product users. So if you have an example, let's say you have 50,000 active users, who use your product on a monthly basis, and then you have another 50,000 website visitors who came from marketing campaigns and so on. That will be 100,000 users, and Segment will charge you about $1,000 for that, $1,000 a month for that. So it's clear that as you grow, as you go from to 100K users, to 500,000, 1 million users, it starts to add up. mParticle actually has tiers, monthly packages, depending on user count. But again, they'll also be in the few $1,000s range. I know they'll have some smaller packages. So really, the biggest barrier is the cost. And really, initially, especially when you're starting out, it really feels like you're paying twice, right? So now you have to pay Mixpanel for the data. You may be paying Mixpanel, a couple $1,000s a year, and now you also have to pay Segment another couple thousands a year to be able to flow the data. So what's the point, right? So, but if you can look at it as an investment instead of saying, yes, I'm doubling my cost from that initially, and I have to support that somehow, but you're really investing in the future, and you're really investing in that moment where you really want to migrate away from Mixpanel, you really want to do other things. You invested in that foundation, right? There is a cost to maintain all these tools. I find the cost to maintain them is similar to really maintaining any analytics tool like Mixpanel and so on, but those are all costs to consider, right? Apart from the cost, some of the other downsides that I've seen come up, debugging can become a little harder. So if you have an issue now, let's say you have an issue with Mixpanel, but you're sending the data through Segment or mParticle, now your support options are a little bit limited, just because if you reach out to Mixpanel, they might be like, well, we can't really help you, because you're not sending this data directly to us, you're sending it through Segment and so on. I've seen that come up a few times. But really, the cost is really the biggest issue, right? I find if you were to get away from cost, and that's okay, you're able to justify that, then you really have a lot of benefits, especially in the beginning. Eventually, once you grow and become much larger, the cost would just become even a little bit too much. Eventually, at some point, it just makes more sense to build your own solution. But by that point, that you're big enough to build your own internal Segment.com or internal mParticle, you'll likely have lots of experience of what you really want in a pipeline, in some kind of abstraction tool, so be able to build that. Okay, we did this demo. Perfect. So that's actually all we have. So we're actually just on schedule. I see a couple questions here, which I'll tackle soon. Final note here, for those companies who are ready, who want to start tracking actionable analytics data this week. I will offer you can book a 30-minute strategy call with us today. What we, a little bit about these calls, we do them all the time. They're really interesting. Really it's for companies who are interested in, understand what marketing channels drive users, improving your onboarding experience, figuring out what product features you want to build, and so on. Really for those companies who are a little, they might be a little bit past product market fit. They have some users, they have some data, and they really want to start figuring out how to improve that. So these calls, we experiment a lot with them in the past. first, we'll of course answer any media questions you might have. Those tend to be a lot of technical questions. Should we use this tool? Should we use that? We have this issue. We have that issue. So we'll tackle those. But really, what we really want to do in the bulk of the calls, we really want to come up with three things, three action steps that you can take to improve your current situation. So that might mean, some examples might be, hey, we have Google Analytics, we have Mixpanel, we have some basic data, but we're really struggling to do this. So we'll try to come up and be like, you know what, based on what you have, resources, and the information we know, you should try to do X, Y, and Z. Here's an expected level of difficulty for each one, time and resources, but that will get you a little bit closer to what you want, right? It's not a full-on, this solves all your problems, now you're much happier, but it gives you things that you can tackle, right? And a lot of them are really doable things that you can start to tackle. So they're also not things to say, hey, now we have to go spend 6 months implementing this. Is we can tackle them over the next week, over the next few days. So those three things, clear your action steps, and also gives you a chance to get to know us, gives you a chance to see if there's a possibility of us working together, but you also walk away with some actionable things. Few things that companies we work with, some of the web apps, mobile apps, like Creative Bubbles, Poll, we help some Mixpanel, Google Analytics, really understand what's going on in the product. Another example is HypeEdit. Really, we find a really cool product. They actually help artists get fans from the music. So they post a song on SoundCloud, and now they want to promote it to fans. But they want to get email addresses, or they want to get social media shares on Twitter or Instagram. They help you build those landing pages around that. Very interesting product. So our requirements, you do have to be the owner of marketing or growth of your company, marketing, growth, or product at your company. So that's usually might be a director of marketing, head of marketing. As long as you own it and you have control over it, we'd love to talk to you. And you're ready to commit. So you're ready to commit resources. Something else I would say is, for companies who are a little too early, so maybe they don't have a lot of data, they don't have a lot of users, that might also not be the right fit. It's at a point where you've been able to grow without it, and hey, if we only had the data, I think we'd be able to grow faster. I find that's a really great place to be. So I'll post that. Let me see if I can copy this. Let me go back here. There we go. So I'll post in the chat and go back to my presentation. So it's the calendar link. You can use it, find the best time for you, and we can chat. Perfect. So we're at 10:41, just on schedule, give or take. So I do have I see one question in the chat, and there was a couple questions submitted before. So let me jump right in. So first question from Melinda. Does Segment replace Google Tag Manager for setup of Google Analytics? Somewhat. So this is a question that comes up a lot. Google Tag Manager and Segment do overlap in functionality quite a bit. So for those who don't know, Google Tag Manager helps you deploy tags on your, I guess, primarily website. So a common example is you set up, and now you want to track, let's say, form submissions. You want to track clicks. And then you want to deploy the Facebook pixels and so on all your pages. Very popular for people who live in the Google world. So if you use AdWords and use Google Analytics, maybe double click and so on, then Google Tag Manager has to be there. So yes, so Segment can do a lot of the things that Google Tag Manager can do. So let's say you want to deploy, you want to add the Facebook pixels to all your pages. Segment could do that, right? So you could load Segment on all your pages, which is how it should really be implemented, and you can load the pixel through there. The main difference that I would say between them is on how you can trigger tags, right? So when you look at the Segment implementation, it's really meant for developers, and it's really meant to be done through code. So if you wanna fire an event when someone submits a form, if you were to do it through Segment, the way we would do it is we would say, hey, we want to write some custom code, maybe on the back end, maybe on the website itself, on the web app itself, and we're going to fire the specific JavaScript. But it's all 100% 100% JavaScript, 100% Ruby, and so on. Versus, of course, Tag Manager, you have the nice interface that lets you track form submissions, so clicks and so on. So you could, someone who's let's say a marketer and not a coder, they could do it themselves. That's really the main difference. What we have done in the past, with specifically, in our past projects, we have actually used both of them together, right? So in some cases, the marketing team is using Google Tag Manager to track a lot of the interactions on the website, on the marketing website. So they're tracking, clicks on the call to actions, and they're tracking a few other things on the page itself. So they'll still use that. They'll still use Google Tag Manager to track all those things. But then the tag itself that they'll be loading would just be a snippet for segment, right? So maybe they want to track that's when people scroll down. So they want to see when people scroll down to about half the page. So they'll set that up in Google Tag Manager using the scroll triggers. So it does it, and then they'll load a custom HTML tag, which will be a little piece of JavaScript code for segment.com. So that way you're still flowing the data through. So that's what think about Google Tag Manager as an easy way to trigger things, but you can still ensure you're triggering things into your central pipeline, which is segment, right? So kind of Tag Manager's here, and it's just another way to collect data, but you still want to send it through segment, so it gets centralized and stored. And of course, I find that the biggest value prop for segment is all the stuff that needs to be tracked on the product itself. So all the stuff that needs to come from mobile apps and from backend and stuff like that as a way to centralize it. Let me see. Let me know if that answers your questions, if there's any follow-up that's needed there. I'm thinking of anything else, any other questions that might have come up, or that come up quite a bit. One question I do see a lot is understanding, about the capabilities of some of the segment. Do they really have all the libraries and so on? That is, do they have, libraries for JavaScript and mobile apps and stuff like that? And the answer to that is actually yes. And I find that a lot of times it's a lot easier to implement things through something like Segment or mParticle than specific tools. We had cases where we want to do very complex things, and they're much easier to do. So, an example, let's say e-commerce tracking on Google Analytics. So that's something that you can do manually. We've done it manually. We've done it through Google Tag Manager. We've done it through Segment. So all three. I find that since Segment forces you to a very specific structure, so a very specific way of doing things, that is sometimes easier to tackle than doing it custom for every tool. Because now we could take, we could look at Segment's e-commerce implementation and say, hey, we want to track e-commerce data. Segment is expecting us to do it in this very clear 1, 2, 3 steps. We do that, we set it up, and now all of a sudden, we can send that e-commerce data to anywhere that supports e-commerce data, right? So now we only have to do it once, versus if we were to do it, say, for Google Analytics, we could get it right for Google Analytics, and then another tool pops up, and now we have to do it their way, which is probably different than the way Google Analytics does it. So you start with very different things, even though you're doing the same thing, right? The same thing is you're sending the same data to both tools. So I find that it does simplify development time, especially if your team is inexperienced in implementing tools. That is, they haven't done it as much in the past, which is common. You'll find a lot of developers who haven't really implemented Mixpanel or haven't implemented Segment or so on. So really, they don't really know exactly yet what the best practices are. They haven't seen all the potential issues. So by using something like Segment and mParticle, they really get a lot of those best practices built into what they do. So that's it can be handy. Perfect. So I think that's it. Questions? Yeah. So I think that's all we have for questions here. So I'm gonna end it right here. As I mentioned, I'll send you the recording. Everything goes by email. Any other links and so on that you want will be in there. But let me know if you have any questions. And thanks again for joining. Have a good day.